And it was a press conference that's unlike any other press conference I've ever seen. There was no podium, there were no tables, there weren't rows of constituents. It was a show, it was a spectacle. And I think what we saw was a great pivot. And I think all the evidence is there that it was a pivot. Dave Meltzer even wrote about this in the Observer, and he says, "We've been told, as have most insiders, many things that contradict each other. So the absolute truth is pretty much impossible to decipher." I don't know about that. But he does go on to say that Dwayne Johnson signed this deal with Ari Emanuel and Nick Khan on January 3rd to not just be on the board of directors, but to go ahead and headline this year's WrestleMania. And when that board announcement was made, man, he was doing all kinds of media with ESPN and other places, talking about this being the biggest WrestleMania in history. It felt like that was the decision. And you even saw Cody say, "Not at WrestleMania." Looked like there was a fan backlash and they pivoted. And man, I thought they made some delicious lemonade with what we saw. You've had a few days to sort of process it all. We were reacting in real time over on YouTube. Now that you've had a chance to sit with it for a minute, and maybe you saw Triple H's promo to open up SmackDown this past Friday, what do you think about what we saw on Thursday in Las Vegas?
I really have two perspectives. I agree with you. I think what we saw at that press conference, I have a hard time even calling it a press conference because it really wasn't one. But at the event that we saw and covered live, without a question, a pivot. Because if you go back and you look at Cody's promo from SmackDown, you look at what happened on the following Monday, to me, at least as a viewer and somebody who's outside of the inner sanctum of creative and creative strategies, I firmly believe that they meaning Rock and company, were ready to move with Rock and Roman and perhaps book Cody for the rest of his story at a later PLE, premium live event, whether it be SummerSlam or whatever. I think that was the plan. And then to your point, and I think anybody that's paying any attention at all, we saw a massive backlash from the audience. And I think what we saw in the press conference was a reaction to that. Yes. And like you, I believe that they definitely made lemonade out of lemons. It was a great move. It worked. There's so much controversy. There's so much investment. There's so much investment by the audience into Cody Rhodes and his story. I'm going to talk a lot about story on this episode, even as it relates to AEW. And we saw this past week, Sting and Darby Allin and Bill and all that. We're going to talk about that. But I think they made the right, I think they, being WWE, made the right move.
Yeah.
I think there's more, for me at least, and perhaps it's because I'm much more involved as it relates to covering what's going on and paying closer attention to what's going on than I normally would have. But to me, there just seems to be such a heightened interest and passion for WrestleMania and for Cody's story. And now with Rock involved, it only increases it. And I think the controversy, even though I believe creatively, strategically, they fumbled the ball with Rock and the announcement with Roman Reigns and Cody giving up his opportunity. Because there's no reason for Cody to do what he did that Friday night on SmackDown and give up, or whenever it was, Monday, to give up his opportunity to finish his story, something that he is personally in real life.
Yes.
Which is why the audience is connecting to that story so much, because this isn't just a well-crafted, scripted story. There is so much reality and authenticity in Cody Rhodes and his quest, his mission, his goal. The audience has become invested in it. I think their reaction to what we saw prior to the press conference on SmackDown and Raw leading up to it, it became too obvious to those involved in creative to ignore. It's kind of like the social media has finally reached that point where there is a decentralization, if you will, of power.
Wow.
And WWE, like so many other forms of entertainment, are beginning to react to it. Whereas, as I think under Vince McMahon, we've seen this a million times. When Vince was on top of all creative, it was, damn the audience. They'll like what I want them to like.
That's right.
That attitude was pretty pervasive coming out of WWE for a long time. It's one of the reasons I think that, and you could argue that this was good or bad, I guess, but you can argue that Vince's, for lack of a better term, stubbornness and unwillingness to listen to the audience was one of the reasons that Roman Reigns is closing in on 1,000, whatever it is, victories, or 1,000 days as champion or whatever. Vince stuck with Roman when the audience didn't. And perhaps that was a good thing, perhaps not. But I think where we are today, you have different leadership that has a different perspective. And I think the social media backlash and a decentralization of power, if you will, forced WWE to go in a different direction. Correct course, really. And I'm happy to see it, man. Happy to see it.
Yeah, I think they're super serving their audience. They are willing to listen to the audience. And, as long as, we've seen what Brian Gewirtz has done in WWE. I mean, he's hit home run after home run after home run. You've even said on this program that perhaps the most memorable piece of business you ever did in WWE was the Billy and Chuck wedding and the big reveal that you were the minister and the 3-minute warning thing. And that was all Brian's idea. And so, Brian is back involved here. Obviously he's Rock's right-hand man. And I just thought, listen, they did about as good of a job as you could have imagined. And it left a lot of questions. As you and I pointed out on the live broadcast over on YouTube, there were 16 televisions between then and the pay-per-view WrestleMania. So you've also got, that other premium live event down in Perth. And let's not forget, WrestleMania, unlike many years ago, is a 2-night affair. So they've really got 17 opportunities. As you and I record that, one SmackDown is down, and we saw that Triple H came out and was pretty pointed towards The Rock. And that makes me think, man, they can tell a hell of a story here, because a lot of people are ready to see, Rock have some interaction with Triple H. That was teased several years ago in WrestleMania out in California, and it didn't really go anywhere. But it looked like possibly at the time, it might be Rock and Ronda against Triple H and Stephanie. We never saw that match, and I'm not saying, given Triple H's recent health stuff, that we will see a match. But the idea that he is standing across from The Rock, not necessarily in a physical altercation, but that sort of keys into wrestling history, and that's what fans like and they want to see. And they also really like the idea of, hey, let's not forget that on some level, Cody and Hunter have some history too. On the first AEW show, Cody took a sledgehammer to a giant throne on the set of AEW. And a lot of people are wondering, where does this leave us? And I think that not knowing and not being able to call it is what has got people buzzing. I mean, over the last week, I have heard from more people who I didn't even think still watched wrestling, or, I haven't been in regular contact with. They're talking about this. I think not being able to call it and it not being predictable and The Rock's involvement, man, they're going to have more buzz going into this than they have in a long, long time. And I don't think that's debatable, Eric.
Absolutely not. I mean, I can't remember, and perhaps you can, or our listeners can, viewers on YouTube. I just can't remember in recent history a WrestleMania that has so much story and passion.
Yes.
WrestleMania has, to me at least, WrestleMania has always been this fantastic attraction, an event that, even if you're just a passive wrestling fan, and I think the audience that buys WrestleMania, I would really be interested to dive into the research, if it even exists, that could perhaps shed some light on how many of the people that actually buy WrestleMania watch WWE on a regular basis, let's say 3 times a month, whether it be Raw, or SmackDown, or a combination of Raw and SmackDown. It's just a wild ass guess, but I would imagine about 25 or 35% of the WrestleMania audience typically don't watch wrestling on a regular basis because it's become that much of a cultural phenomenon, much like the Super Bowl. It has that sense of
Well, hang on now, Eric. Let me make sure I'm following you here. Are you suggesting that there's 2.5 million people who watch? We've never talked about this, but are you suggesting there's 2.5 million people who watch SmackDown, say, and you think that 4 times that will watch WrestleMania?
no. If I implied that, then I'm not being clear. I think there is a percentage of the audience, 25 or 35%, for WrestleMania alone that typically don't watch the show. So
Okay.
if 100 people buy WrestleMania, I'm suggesting that perhaps 75% of them watch WWE on a regular basis, say 3 times a month, 4 times a month. I think that there is a percentage of the people that buy WrestleMania buy it because why they consider themselves wrestling fans in general are not typically invested in the characters of the stories. I may be wrong. I've never done the analysis. I haven't seen the data, but I do believe that because WrestleMania is so much like the Super Bowl, I think there's a lot of people that will be watching the Super Bowl tonight, as we're recording this on Sunday, that typically don't watch a lot of football. I'm one of them. I'm going to tune in to the Super Bowl. I'm going to bet on San Francisco, even though I know that's cursed. I shouldn't be betting with anybody on anything. But there's so much story. I listen to CBS Sports Radio almost all afternoon as I'm driving around, and I do that because it helps me it helps me enjoy Super Bowl. It will help me enjoy Super Bowl even more because I'll have more backstory. I'll have a better understanding of the teams and the players and how they got to where they are. And it's that story, Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. I love that story. And it's one of the reasons why emotionally, because I bet with my emotions, not with my brain, obviously. But that story is so interesting to me that I'm become a fan of Brock Purdy. Now, I couldn't pick Brock Purdy out of a lineup if there was $1 million worth of cash sitting on the table. That's how unfamiliar I am with Brock Purdy and actually the San Francisco 49ers. I haven't been following them. But the story that is setting up the Super Bowl and obviously the Kansas City Chiefs, there's a great story there just with the two quarterbacks. Has there been another quarterback that has gone from college into the pros that has had as much success and has been as consistent as Patrick Mahomes? He's a special cat. So is Brock Purdy. And the story between those two quarterbacks is so interesting to me that I can't wait for the Super Bowl. And I think there are a lot of fans like me. It's the Super Bowl and WrestleMania has become one of those events that brings people together, whether they're passionate football fans or passive like I am. Same is true with WrestleMania. But I think this WrestleMania, because of the story, not unlike Brock Purdy and Patrick Mahomes, and that backstory is what's creating so much interest. So I do think, and I don't know the percentage, if it's 10%, 20%, whatever it is, but I'm pretty certain there'll be a lot of viewers for WrestleMania that typically don't watch WWE on a basis.